Hello, Dr. Steve.
Yes, Kalu.
We want to start.
Well, I was thinking it was about time. What do I see? Do we only have 4 students at this point?
I think the others will join us.
Okay. All right. Well, let's then begin. I see someone just came in, but let's begin. I wanted
Yes.
to give 1 or 2 thoughts, biblical thoughts, and then a prayer, and then we will enter into the class, if that's okay. All right.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Genesis chapter 1. It reads this way. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Verse 3. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. Verse 6. And God said, let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. Verse 9. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. Verse 11. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation. Verse 14. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. Verse 20. And God said, let the water teem with living creatures. Verse 24. And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. Verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them, speaking of man, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed that you need." We find God, the Creator, speaking our universe, our world, into existence. Speaking everything that we experience into existence. And he created us in his image, that we might be creative, as he is creative, that we might rule over the land, as he rules over the land, not for ourselves, but for the land and the world's betterment. You see, God didn't need to create us. He didn't need to create the world. And yet he spoke us into existence that we might experience his love and his fellowship, just as the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit existed and experienced love, fellowship, communication before time even began. So as we enter into looking at the theological foundations of leadership today and throughout this week and next week, we want to remember that leadership isn't something that we created as human beings. It's something that God created in human beings. And obviously, as all of you know, there's ways to lead that aren't productive. There's ways to lead that are oppressive. There's ways to lead that are ungodly. At the same time, there are very clear ways to lead that God gives us. And we want to look at those and want to see how they fit into leadership and how leadership fits into them, so that we can follow that. I look at a quote by a fellow who is in the United States. His last name is Barna, and he says this: "A Christian leader is someone who is called by God to lead, leads with and through Christ-like character, and demonstrates the functional competencies that permit effective leadership to take place." So there's three things that Barna has noted about Christian leadership. One, it's a calling from God. As we look at this, we're going to see how God calls, and that God does call, and that Christian leadership is a calling from God. Secondly, it involves character. I guess we've probably all been exposed to leaders who lack character, who lack integrity, and they're untrustworthy. Christian leadership, the theological foundation of leadership, biblically, involves Christ-like character. And then functional competencies that permit effective leadership to take place. That's being able to do the work of leadership, to have competency in the things required. And some, as we'll discover today, say, well, you're born with that or you're not. But I think we'll discover that God can create in us, God can develop in us those competencies to lead. So I'm excited about what's going to be our time together today and throughout the week. So we'll get started. And then toward the end of our time today, I will make one or two announcements. So remind me to make those announcements about the coming week and the things we're going to be looking at. First, before we begin, let me say thank you to my brother Kalu, as he was able to send to you many of the reading materials that we will be talking about and that you will need to be reading during our times together. There was some difficulty sending them, and so he surpassed that and overrode the difficulty and sent them to you. I saw some of you receiving them, so I'm very thankful to you, Kalu, for doing that. So that will be helpful, and we will talk about the syllabus as we go forward now, and that will show you how some of those materials fit in. Let's see if I can share the screen with the syllabus. I'm sorry, it looks like my syllabus that I put there to be shared didn't pop up. Let me try something here. There, we were able to bypass the problem. Could you help me by giving me some feedback? Are you able to see that syllabus?
Yes, we can see it.
Good. Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Okay. If I can just take one more minute to get everything set. There we go. Now I hope you can see it even better. All right. So, the purpose of our course. We seek to understand a biblical, theological, and philosophical basis for leadership in the context of contemporary world views. We'll be talking about worldviews as we go, and as you probably know, there are many competing worldviews in our world today, so we will place the idea of, or the concept of theological leadership in some of those worldviews. Leadership metaphors, forms, styles, functions, responsibilities, and the character of leaders are explored within a framework of scriptural truth, scriptural justice, and scriptural accountability. Also, we're going to look at the dynamics of church and state relations that help us to empower our leaders within the Church of Christ and their followers to be Christian agents of transformation. You know, the Lord didn't just leave us here to have a good time together in our little group, but He wants us to be agents of transformation to the society around us. Just this past week, last Saturday, I was invited to come to an event, if I can, for poverty-stricken people in an area of Orlando, Florida, where I live. As I was there, we were giving food to people who don't normally get food. And the lady who organized the event had secured clothing for people who lacked clothing. And there were about 35 people came. And we had a wonderful time together being agents of transformation because we put the gospel of Jesus Christ first in all that was done. So it was a wonderful time together. Okay, we'll keep moving. What are our expected outcomes for our course together? Well, we want to describe the meaning and the functions. Well, students will be able, when you've completed the course, to describe the meaning and the functions and characteristics of a biblical, values-driven leader. You're going to know the difference between leadership and management, as it says there, and you're going to understand a little bit more about leadership and what it is to be a follower, or what we call followership there. Number 2, we're going to identify and describe a biblical theistic worldview in the context of many different worldviews that are diametrically opposed to our biblical worldview. And then we're going to ask questions: how does this relate to the African church and society? And then we want to apply biblical metaphors and principles of leadership, help you learn how to apply those in your leadership philosophy and your leadership practice. We want this to be a practical, it's not just a knowledge, which is important, but we also want it to be practical. We want to talk about skills and the type of skills that we can use to be better leaders in God's kingdom. So, the content of the course. There, now I got it. We're going to define leadership and leadership versus management, and also leaders and followers, already mentioned. The biblical qualities of a leader. We're also going to talk about how our personal values, that's number C, or letter C, how our personal values enter into our leadership and our decision making. D, what are the priorities of the kingdom of God, and what is our role as a leader in his kingdom? And I use the word there, under shepherds, because as the book that is our major text says, it's Christ who's the shepherd, the supreme shepherd. We are simply under shepherds in his kingdom. E, how the church and state relate, what are our roles as Christian leaders in church and state. And then F, a presentation of a biblical theistic worldview, as we said earlier, as a framework for integrating our biblical and our cultural and our professional leadership perspectives. You see, culture is often, even within the Christian church, culture is what we listen to more often than the Bible. And this happens so often. In my culture, it happens day in and day out. And as Christian leaders, we need to be able to separate out the difference between our cultural values and the biblical values that we need to practice. And sometimes they're in alignment, but very often they are not. So we'll be talking about that. And we'll have class discussions and lecture and small groups, etc., and some case studies. They're Merkel and Schreiner, Shepherding God's Flock, Biblical Leadership in the New Testament and Beyond. You should have received that because I saw that our brother Kalu was sending it to all of you. And as we go, you'll see that there's going to be an assignment even for this evening for your reading of that material. Okay. And then I make some suggestions, one of them being a book by Dr. Albert Mohler, The Conviction to Lead. And I'm trying to get that as an ebook to send to you because I make a suggestion. It's not required, but this is excellent, excellent reading by Dr. Albert Mohler. So I'm going to try to get an ebook to send that to you for your own reading as a part of the course. Okay? Here are the course assignments or assessment. You'll do a research paper that will be due at the end of or not due at the end, but you will begin that paper at the end of our course. It'll be due 2 weeks after our course. So you don't have to do the paper at this point. I hope and pray, and I've tried to design it this way, that the research paper will be able to draw upon what we've learned during the course and will make it more meaningful to you. there'll be reading interaction papers, and that they will amount to 10%. And so your first paper will be due tomorrow evening, or tomorrow at class time, because you'll be doing some reading tonight. So you'll want to read and then write your reflections upon that. One page, it should be at least 3/4 of a page and not 3 or 4 pages. So it should be that type of a thing, about 1 page long. If I get 2 paragraphs and that's a half a page, I'm going to ask you to write a little bit more on your reflections, okay? There will be a final exam at the end of the course on the 12th of April, and I think we'll be preparing you for that as we go along. And then there is a post-course reading assignment. You'll do that reading assignment as a part of your research paper. So basically 50% of your overall grade is those readings and your research paper, because those readings relate to what you would want to be writing in the research paper. So as it says there, I'll be asking each of you to provide written confirmation via either WhatsApp or email that you have completed the readings and that you have incorporated what they teach into your research paper. You don't have to quote them verbatim, but the ideas and the metaphors, and there will be some, I'm sure, quotes that you would want to put in there. So as it says there, the last sentence, the instructor, that being me, is indebted to Dr. William Udon for the original course outline and the foundational course content. I've added to it a little bit and taken away in a couple of places over the years, but he was the creator of the course. So you also have an outline here of the 2 weeks. Today, first day, and tomorrow, Wednesday. I need to tell you this. There will be no class tomorrow. I am completing another course with students from Kenya in the ILU in Kenya, which would be equal to Acts. So tomorrow there will be no class, but your readings will be the same, and we're going to attempt to cover this material that I've laid out there. Then on Thursday and Friday, we'll look at worldviews and leadership and what are contemporary worldviews, how do we change those worldviews, and how does our theology of leadership play into that. Also, there's reading there that you'll need to be doing, the chapters in Merkel and Schreiner, okay? The book that Kalu sent to you. Days 5 and 6, which are Monday and Tuesday of next week, we'll look at the leadership structure in the Old Testament in the synagogue and how shepherds were viewed in the Gospels. There'll be reading as you see that. And then Wednesday and Thursday of next week, we'll be looking at the pattern of leadership in Acts and in Paul's letters. And also, we're going to look at the consolidation, the development and consolidation of the papacy, how that has played a role in Christianity worldwide. Okay, and then day 9, the last day, next Friday, not this Friday, but Friday a week after, will be the final exam. And because of my obligations for Ethiopia and others, our brother Kalu will be there at the exam, or be available during the exam for you as you take the exam, and then you will turn in your exam papers or emails, whatever, to Brother Kalu, who will forward them all to me. Okay, so when we talk about these assignments, all the work needs to be typed. I'm sorry to say that if you aren't a typist, but I've gotten handwritten reflections so many times over the last 7 years that I cannot read. So if you can type them, please do that and then turn them in to me. And double spaced just helps me in the reading aspect. As it says there, the work should demonstrate careful thought, the use of bibliographic support for your observations and assertions, and a demonstration of theoretical and practical integration. In your reflections, I want to know how the material impacted you in your thinking and your thoughts about application and what you saw the material saying. That's your reflections. So please remember that. And you want to write as well as you can with as good a grammar as you can and that type of thing. Okay? All right. Now, the style manual that it's talking about in proofreading, yes, you should look it over before you submit it to make sure that it makes sense. And then the style manual, you should submit, your work in a style called the APA format. There's an APA manual available there at ACTS if you don't know that. And when we talk about your research paper, that APA format is very important. Your reflections are basically yours. You might put a quote in there. It would be required that you tell me where that quote comes from. So the APA format will help you to reference that quote. All right? It occasionally happens that personal priorities of a family or professional duties create a situation where one has to be absent from a class or one is late with an assignment. So I need to know about that as soon as this arises so that this doesn't come as a surprise, let's use the word to me, but more importantly, so that we can make sure that you're able to navigate to the completion of the course. Okay? Okay. And these are some possible places to draw more understanding of Christian leadership and of that and how it impacts people in Africa. These are very good treatments of the idea of Christian leadership. Okay, so I think we have, okay, the network. Are there any questions at this point that anyone has? Unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one, please. Okay. Excuse me a minute, it's not operating the way I see that I have. There it is. Okay.
Yes, sir. Can I say something, sir? Hello, sir. Sir, can you hear me?
I can now hear you.
Okay. Sir, I'm thinking your volume is a bit low, that I'm hardly getting all that you are saying. I don't know if there's a way it can increase.
Yes. Can you hear me now? Is it
Yeah, I can hear
better
you
now?
It's better than before.
Is it better?
So if it can be more- Yes, it's getting better, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you for telling me because you need to be able to hear me. So that's good. Thank you. Okay. Good. All right. Thank you for that feedback.
My hand is raised, sir.
Yes, Dilly.
All right, sir. Thank you for the introduction. You were talking about the paper writing and presentation. I couldn't get exactly what you said in terms of the number of pages. I thought you were saying 1 page. Then I heard you again say 3 pages or something like that. When we are going to write our reflections.
Yes, yes. Well, bad internet. I said it should be between 3/4 of a page long and 1 page.
Okay.
But I also said, and this is what you didn't hear, I said, please do not send me 3 pages of a reflection.
Okay.
It's 1
All right,
page.
sir.
And so it broke
Okay.
out in between, and you heard 3 pages. 1 page, that's sufficient. Okay?
That's right.
But I also said I don't want 2 paragraphs about 6 lines on the page. I want the whole page, full ideas about your reflections, and they should include how the principles impact your thinking about leadership within the church, and they should include what you saw of the principles that were most attractive to you, and 1 or 2 sentences, if you could, of I think this would help to do whatever X is, an application statement, okay, in your reflections.
All right. Thank you for the clarification.
No, excellent question. Any other questions, please? Okay, I'm going to take down this, and we will move toward our first PowerPoint for the day. Dilly, can you see that? Okay,
Yes, I can see it. I can
it
see it.
looks like you can. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Let me see if I can get this set up so that we can use it. There we go. That should be filling your screen so that you can see it very well. Our first time together, Theological Foundations of Leadership. And there are varied ideas in here, so it's going to cover a fairly broad spectrum of ideas about leadership and theological leadership, okay? All right. Whoa, wait a minute. All right. This is not too easily done when we're doing virtual as we are, but I would like to ask this question. It's called group answer on your screen. We're not going to go into small groups because of the technical difficulties, but the group answer. And I would like people, all of you, to answer this question and out loud if you could, so that we can all hear. What, in your opinion, is leadership? How would you define it? What, in your opinion, is leadership? How would you define it? So we're available. Unmute yourself and then let us know. What, in your opinion, is leadership? How would you define it? We'll look at the other 2 questions later after this, but that's our first one, these first 2 questions. What, in your opinion, is leadership? How would you define it?
Yeah, can I speak?
Manuel, please, go
Yes,
ahead.
sir. Yeah. In a nutshell, I would say leadership is ability to influence people to achieve a goal. You know, is the act of having an influence over a group of people to achieve a certain objective or certain goal will be a very short way for me to define leadership.
Okay. So leadership is goal oriented. You're going to, as a group of people, going to accomplish a goal and you're leading people to that goal. Good. Very good. Other definitions of leadership as you see them. Please speak, Dele.
All right, sir. Thank you. I would rather say, let me describe rather than define leadership.
Okay, describe. That's very good. Very good.
All right, sir. Describing leadership, I want to look at it from the perspective of what God said about Abraham in Genesis 18.
Okay.
He said, I have known Abraham. That, let me just read it. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. I see here a man that is not just giving instruction. He is actually the message and not just a messenger. I see a man here who is doing what he wants others to do, and by doing it so well, inspires others. But it doesn't stop there. He also speaks to them, and where necessary, uses his influence to support them in doing the right thing, in focusing at attaining to a particular goal that they all are looking at. That is what I see in leadership. That is not just about giving instructions, dishing out orders. It's about being a model that inspires others, such that your being a model inspires them, makes them to also be committed to that cause and to be able to join forces with you in attainment of that corporate goal that you people have ahead of you. So you are able to see and help them to see. And also you provide the support for them such that they are able to believe in themselves, believe in the vision, and contribute their quotas towards achievement of it. That's what I see I can describe as leadership, sir.
Well described. Yes, yes. Because I think we all know this when we've seen leaders who are untrustworthy, leaders who lack integrity, have negative character. We don't want to follow them. We don't trust them. So very well described, Dele. Very well described. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Because the leader is the role model for his team. Let's use that word. And if he or she isn't, for example, they have done studies in major businesses throughout the world, really, but mainly in the Western, in Europe and the United States. They did these studies and they find that in major corporations even, but in smaller corporations, companies with 50, 60 people, even companies with 10 or 15 people working. But in major corporations, companies with 2,000 or 3,000 employees, if the leader or the leaders, because it can be a team, if they are unethical, if they are not honest, then the people throughout the organization know this almost immediately, and then they themselves become dishonest. They themselves do things they know they shouldn't do because they look to the leader and they say, he's not honest, why should I be honest? So, as you described it, it's very important, the character aspect, that we know we can trust the leader. When we step into the biblical world, as you said about Abraham, yes, this is extremely important, because if I have a T-shirt, it says, "Walk the talk,
Mhm.
do not just talk the walk. And that's right where you're coming from. If we talk about how wonderful the Lord is and how wonderful being a follower of Jesus is, and yet people see our habit patterns, our actions that don't align with who the Lord is, then they don't trust our message, but they don't see us as God's men and women who are leaders. So very well said. Any other descriptions or anything of that? Okay, Tisumbu, please.
All right, thank you, sir. I would like to describe leadership as the heart and heart of using the instrumentality of influence to direct or redirect a people towards an identified goal or objective. Thank you.
Very well said. Yes, and that just fits right into what Dile already said. It's an influence. Leadership, and we will talk about this. You'll see that it's an influence, and we're going to talk about what that means. Yes, that's good. Thank you. But that's exactly true. Leadership is an influence, either for good or for ill. And if it's not for good, then there's a problem, a major problem. So it is an influence. And when we talk about theological leadership, once again, influence. We have Abraham, we have Isaac, we have David, we have Solomon. All of these men exerted influence. We move into the New Testament, and we have Jesus obviously exerting tremendous influence. But after his resurrection, which we just celebrated, praise the Lord, after his resurrection,
Amen.
we have Peter and the apostles exerting an influence because the Spirit of God lived within them. The Holy Spirit had come to reside within them. And they had influence beyond the imagination. And in fact, in the first century, the church, Peter, the Apostle John, the Apostle Paul, the church influenced the Roman Empire beyond imagination because they were trusting Christ and they were leaders. So influence, very well said. Anybody else? All of these are very good answers or descriptions. David, did you have something?
All right. I think leadership is the act of service, serving the people towards a given goal or purpose. That's what I can describe it as.
Okay, very well stated, David, because if leadership is all about me, then that's not leadership. That's selfishness. That's making me the center of the universe. You know, my culture is a very individualistic culture, one of the most individualistic cultures on earth. I know that African culture throughout the continent tends to be less individualistic and more community-based. But an interesting aspect of individualism is people develop this concept, I am the center of the entire universe. What I want, what I like, what makes me happy, what makes me comfortable, that's what the universe is all about. And has no idea of service. But yes, leadership involves serving others. Maybe it's for a common goal. It's a goal we all agree to, but it does involve service. And interestingly enough, as we walk through here in the next day or two, as we walk through some of the definitions of leadership and the types of leadership that have been developed, we're going to see that what you've just said, David, is one of the aspects of leadership that has been picked up on most recently in the last 25 years. whereas before it wasn't really thought about. But we'll talk more about that at that point. Okay, excellent answers. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? It seems obvious to me you've all been thinking about leadership, and that's great. Anyone else? Okay. What we'll do then is we're going to move on down here. Now, some definitions from the scholarly world about leadership. Some of them are more scholarly and less practical. Some of them are very practical. And there's some Christian definitions thrown in, and I'll identify those, but these are just in general. James McGregor Burns, in his book Leadership, he says, leadership is one of the most observed and least understood phenomenon on earth. Do you get that? He says, we all see it, but do we truly understand it? And he says, we really don't. And that's true. That's really true. I've seen person after person in my time, as he or she was moved into positions of leadership, you begin to see their understanding of leadership. They had seen leadership many, many years in their lives, but then you begin to see their understanding of leadership. And you could see they did not really understand it, even as you folks have been describing it and defining it. Okay. Here's from Ralph Stogdell. There are almost as many definitions of leadership as there are persons who have attempted to define the concept. And I think that is very true. It's very true. We all have in our head an idea of what leadership is. And my idea, and for example, David Solomon's idea or Delhi's idea, they're probably a bit different. And that's okay, but we need to understand that they are a bit different. And we need to understand, and we're going to look at and try to understand what goes into making them what they are in each of our individual lives, okay? And it says here, Warren Bennis and Bert Nanas wrote a book called Leaders, Strategies for Taking Charge. They discovered over 850 different official definitions of leadership. Did you hear that number? Over 850 that are in official manuals and books and companies and all of this, and in scholarly books, 850 different definitions of leadership. So we need to understand that it's viewed from various angles, and almost everybody has a different understanding of what leadership truly is. Okay? So, what do we have with leadership? What are its characteristics? Leadership involves influence. As you already said, it involves influence. Ken Blanchard, who's a Christian scholar in the area of leadership and in the area of leading, in other words, not just theoretical, but how do you lead? Ken Blanchard says this: leadership is an influence process. It's a process. And I think we have to keep that in mind. Leadership is a process. It's not one act. It's a process. And it's many acts, day after day, year after year, month after month, however you want to say it. So it's a process. And Northouse, a person upon who I'm going to draw a great deal, Peter Northouse, he has a book called Leadership Theory and Practice. Here's how he describes leadership. Leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. And you folks already noted that. I'm trying to remember which one of you, but it doesn't matter. But we are trying to achieve a common goal. And the leader attempts to influence the people in the group, the people on the team, to achieve that goal so that they can be successful in what they're trying to do. Leadership also involves, that jumped. Leadership number 2, it involves character. Leadership is doing what is right when no one is watching. George Van Valkenburg. I remember very well being in a small group of people, and we were talking about integrity and honesty. And one of the fellows in the group, Ted Miller, Ted said, well, integrity is when you do in isolation what you talk about in public. In other words, when no one's watching, when you're doing the same thing you do when everybody's watching. Exactly what Van Valkenburg talks about. That's character. That's integrity. It's doing what is right when no one is watching. I think of all the times. Now, of course, I don't know about Lagos or Nigeria, but it's become quite common in my culture today that whatever store or department store or grocery store that you go into, there's a camera and they're in all the corners. So someone's watching you all the time. But even with that, many people do things that they know are dishonest. So leadership is about integrity or character. We'll talk about different aspects of character as we go. Okay? Leadership is about relationship and trust. We already mentioned this. Ken Blanchard, once again, leadership isn't something you do to people, it's something you do with people. Emphasis on the with people. And the only way you can work with people is to, one, have a relationship, but to have a relationship built upon trust. If you do not trust another person, you can't work with him or for her or however you want to look at it, because there's a lack of trust. But a relationship that has trust involved is where leadership can take place. Leadership is working with and through others to achieve objectives. Paul Hershey says that. Now, once again, if there's no trust, then we can't work with and through others. We can't trust them. I came out of a situation just a couple of weeks ago, helping someone in the inner city here. And it very quickly became evident that I could not trust the other individual. He was saying things that he would do, but then he was doing things that were the exact opposite of what he said. So we couldn't work together. I couldn't work with him because there was no relationship and there was no trust. Leadership is not a person or a position. Joanne Ciula. There are some readings that you're going to have from her. She's quite astute in understanding leadership. It is a complex moral relationship between people based on trust, based upon obligation, based upon commitment, based upon emotion, and a shared vision of the good. Leaders are not just a person or a position, but it's an entire environment where all of these things can take place. Also, yes, there are leaders who are people, but they create this type of moral relationship between the people. And if they don't, then there's no leadership taking place. There might be people who are patient, but they're not being led. They understand that this person, he or she, isn't leading them to a common goal. Okay? Number 4, leadership is about vision. Warren Bennis again, as I said, very well done. He says leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. That is so important. How many times each one of us has had a vision of what we want to do or what we want done, and yet lacked the capacity or the resources to translate that vision into reality. Leadership is about vision, providing that vision, but also making it possible to be real. And leadership is learned. Leaders aren't born, they are made. Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi is one of the most famous coaches of American football. He's passed on, but when he was a coach for some 25, almost 30 years, his teams were always in the top 2 or 3 in the nation. And these were professionals. And he says, leaders aren't born, they are made. Often there's this concept, and we'll talk about it, it's called the trait theory, that a leader's born with all the traits he or she needs to be a leader. And they just do it because that's who they are. They're a born leader. And Vince Lombardi, from his observation of leaders on his football teams and leaders he met in society, and he himself was a leader, they aren't born, they are made. You can learn leadership. And I think that's extremely important for us to remember. We can learn to lead. We may not be as adept as some other individual initially, but we can learn to lead. And I mentioned this earlier, leadership is a process. Let me read this. Leadership is the process of persuasion and example by which an individual or leadership team induces a group to pursue objectives he or she or the team that they share with the leader and his or her followers. In other words, it's a process. Leadership isn't one act. It's much more. It's an entire process. And number 7, and this is where we get into the concept of servant leadership, a recent concept in terms of the scholarly world. Not in terms of the Bible, but in terms of the scholarly world. Leadership is about a servant's attitude. Leadership is about service to others and our commitment to developing more servants as leaders. It involves co-creation of a commitment to a mission. In other words, what Greenleaf is saying is he's saying that if the leader doesn't have a servant's attitude, then it's hard for him or her to be committed to the people in the group, to their betterment. But when they know that the leader is committed to them and has a servant's attitude to them, then they excel in what their roles are because they're encouraged, they're lifted up. Greenleaf is a Mennonite and a Mennonite scholar, and he introduced this, as I said, into the scholarly world maybe 20 years ago, 25, and we have some attempts by the scholarly world to adapt some of what they say to Greenleaf's position. They don't go biblical, but they adapt in terms of attitudes and that type of thing to his position. But Greenleaf has really seen an essential element of leadership, and especially when we begin to talk about the element of leadership within God's kingdom, theological leadership. It involves a servant's attitude, serving others for their betterment. And Jesus, we'll talk about this later, but Jesus exemplified this when he washed his disciples' feet. In his culture, to wash his disciples' feet, he was let's use the word, the big boss. In his culture, that was an act of total servanthood, something that the elite of his day would never do. They would never do washing their followers' feet, because it was an act of service and servitude. And in that culture, only the lowest of people, in terms of cultural hierarchy, only the lowest of people washed other people's feet. And it was their job, whether they liked it or not. And they had no, let's use the word, identification as anyone important. And yet, here is Jesus, the leader of his men, washing their feet. Okay? Greenleaf picks up on that with his servant's attitude. Okay. Okay, so the cultural effect to leadership, okay? Haynes and Dixon say this: they provide evidence that different within cultural groups, people agree in their beliefs about leadership, such that there are significant differences among different cultures in their leadership beliefs. What I mean by that, and what we're trying to say here, there it is, there. Okay, good. Is that different cultures have different ideas about leadership. And that's what you see in the middle of the page, leadership prototypes. These prototypes change from one culture to the next. More often than not, they're fairly similar, but they can be different and vastly different. But those prototypes, they're profiles of presumed, typical, or preferred leader attributes or behaviors, and these prototypes may include leader behaviors, values, attitudes, and personality traits. Okay? Now, let me share how this might work. I grew up in a nation, the United States of America, where Hollywood films were getting more and more famous and influencing people. And there was a film genre called the Western. And in the Western films about the west of the United States in the the late 1800s, in Westerns, there was always a leader. And here's what he was. He was tall. He had a big hat on. He had a very deep voice. He was strong. And he knew exactly what to do in every circumstance. That was the leadership prototype in my culture in the 1950s and 60s and early 70s. It began to change, but that was the leadership prototype in those days. That Western personification of leadership. Now, in 1980s, my wife and I went and lived for 8 years. From 1984 until 1992, we lived in the country of Portugal. I learned very quickly in Portugal that the leadership prototype in that country was very different. Very different. You see, even in those Westerns, even though he was tall and he was like this and he knew what to do, he had associates that are friends or people with him, and he'd work with them and they with him. They would listen to him and do what he said. In Portugal, I learned at that time that the leadership profile was this. The leader knew everything. No one knew what he knew. No one questioned him. No one asked him any questions. You just did what he said. That wasn't even in the Westerns in the United States. There was interaction. But in Portugal at that time, in the early 80s, the leader was God. You did what God said. And if you didn't, it was over. So that was the prototype of leadership. And I met university students because I was talking to university students on a daily basis. And that was their view of what it was to become a leader. And we didn't talk about leadership, but they wanted to be leaders. And sometimes we did talk about leadership. And they were convinced that they had to be that type of person to be a leader. And if they had people skills, they liked to interact with people and talk and all that, then they would never be a leader. Very, very strong prototypes, okay? And every culture has this. Someone give me an idea. What would be a leadership prototype in Nigerian culture? In your opinion, what would be a leadership prototype? What is it to be a leader in Nigerian culture? Not talking about Christian culture, just Nigerian culture. What is it to be a leader? Anybody? Go ahead, Deli.
It is a very interesting matter we have come to. Let me speak generally for Africa, in which Nigeria is.
Okay.
We seem to have the same leadership prototype in Africa based on our culture. We come from a background of having rulers who are called kings, who are despots, emperors, people that had the power of life and death. They could do and undo. And they were seen as being powerful leaders to the extent that they could abuse their power in our own language now. To them, that was actually what showed that they were powerful. And you could see the traces down the generations until our time, wherein that even our politicians, as much as they try, they are still carrying that mentality, possibly unknown to many of them. When your councillor is coming, when your congressman is coming, people have to be stumbling on one another and be killing each other and be sacrificing themselves. That's what makes him a leader. Unfortunately, even the followers have come to accept that over the generations, that's the standard leadership. The standard leadership in Africa generally is actually the antithesis of what we have in Matthew 20-28, where Jesus was talking about servant leadership. It's the direct opposite by all standards. I'm talking purely from a secular perspective. Thank you, sir.
Yes, that's what I wanted to hear. Olusegun, what do you want to add, sir?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what the last speaker said,
Yes.
that if we look at leadership in Nigeria,
we discover that it's heavily influenced by colonialism.
Oh,
You see that, especially when you look at government and governance and people in government, you discover that the colonialists, they did in Nigeria, I'll be specific now, they did in Nigeria what they could never ever do in their country. So they oppressed and suppressed our people. And so when independence came, or freedom or independence, we don't even know what we have in Nigeria, if it's independence or freedom. We discover that those that now got the reins of power, they just, followed suit. They began to have a retinue of servants, and they began to oppress the people just like the colonialists did. So in addition to the fact that, yes, there's a cultural dimension, but there's also the impact of colonialism. And that is part of the problem we have now. Thank you, sir.
thank you. Well, both of you shared very important aspects of your cultural prototype of a leader. Because, as Delhi shared, despots, yes. But, as Olusegun shared, there's a history of how that developed also. And that history is staying there. In my culture, it's very similar. There's a history of how we've developed our concept of leadership. In every culture, there's a history and what those influences are. I know that I have visited Burundi about 4 times, and I began to learn about leadership and Burundian culture. And the French were in charge of, well, they were the colonialists in Burundi, the French and the Belgians, and they set the Hutus and the Tutsis against each other so that the French and the Belgians wouldn't have any problem with them. They would be fighting each other. And they did that by giving the Tutsis, the smaller tribe, giving them all of the positions in government offices. So they were telling the larger tribe, the Hutus, the Hutsis? No, the Hutus, they were telling the Hutus what to do. And over the 100 years that was going on, the hatred between the two tribes was growing. So then when the French and the Belgians left, there was this. And so today, even to this day, and my Burundian friends would tell me this, even to this day, there's animosity between the two tribes. I have a Burundian friend, he's Hutu, and he married a Tutsi. I'm sorry, he's Tutsi, and he married a Hutu woman. And many of his friends won't talk to him anymore because he married that low-class person. So there's history in all of this, as has well been said by the two of you. So thank you. Thank you very well. Well done. Good participation. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, here are some of the theories of what is leadership, okay? Some of the theories of leadership. One of you contributed, you're having problems with your earpiece, but you said most leadership style in Africa is more of oppressive in practice. Very oppressive. That was basically described by both Dele and Olusegun. It's oppressive. That's another way to say exactly what they said. Thank you. Good contribution. So let's look at some of the theories that are out there. Let's use that word, that are out there in terms of leadership. I already mentioned the traits-based theory approach. And that was very popular in the Western world, in Europe and the United States. Well, really, in most of the world, it was very popular between 1900 and 1930. It's called the great man theory. He's born a leader. Certain men, they're born leaders, and they're going to be a leader no matter what, because they have all of the traits of leadership. It has nothing to do with them learning anything or anything like that. It was a very popular approach during that time period. But as we move forward into the 1940s and 1960s, we have what is called the behavior approach. Now, in the behavior approach, there are observable behaviors that a leader uses to lead. And there are two types of behaviors that were identified during the time that this was the most popular view about leadership. One is task behaviors. That's a person has the ability to do the task. The leader does the tasks that get the job done. He or she leads in such a way that they get the job done. That's the task behaviors. They organize, they plan, they have vision of what they should do. The other behavior approach that was viewed during that time was process behaviors. Process behaviors. And that, as it says there on the slide, they were people-oriented leaders. They were oriented toward the people in the process, walking the people through the process. Okay? So the behavior approaches, very, very impactful during the 1940s to the 1960s. Once again, these were mainly in Western Europe and in the United States, although there was some overflow into Asia and Latin America in terms of theoretical approaches. These are all about theoretical approaches to leadership, scholarly approaches. Okay? Then along came, about that same time, the abilities approach. Some people seem to have the natural capacity to lead. At the same time, a leadership ability can be gained through practice and hard work. Now, this sort of tied into the trait theory, but as you see, it went beyond the trait theory and said, but even though some people tend to have the natural capacities, you can learn leadership and you can gain that ability by practicing it and just working hard. So the abilities approach saw that leadership was an ability that could be learned. Okay? The skills approach, a bit different. Leadership is a competency developed to accomplish a task effectively. So the skills approach focused upon your ability or your competency to do the things necessary. Skills are competencies that people can learn or develop. Now the abilities and the skills approach are very, very close together. They're a bit different, but not really. They're very close. One is an ability, the other is a competency, another word for an ability. But the idea of competency takes more of I learned this competency, whereas ability means it was somewhat natural that I could develop my ability. Whereas the competency, I may not have had any of it, but I learned it. Okay? So there's a little bit of a disagreement between those two. Let me check something here. Yeah, okay. We're still in the behaviors approach. Yeah. So these are behaviors. Okay? Now, along came what we call in 1967, and it was very prevalent until the year 2000, what is called the situational approach. And Ken Blanchard, who we've seen quotes from before, he developed this as much as anyone through his observation of leadership in the workplace. And the idea of the situational approach is different situations require different approaches. So the leader, to be a true leader, adapts to the situation. That's what makes a good leader. The man or the woman who can adapt to the situation in which they find themselves and adapt what they're trying to accomplish to that situation. The situational approach. Another popular approach, and you see coming into the 21st century, is what is called the relationship approach. Leadership focused on relationships becomes a process of collaboration that occurs between leaders and followers. The relationship approach. Now, there are more than one aspect of the relationship approach, but I want you to understand that it focuses upon the relationship that the leader has with his or her followers, or that the boss or the director of the company has with the employees. We could say that. The relationship approach, that's the idea. And then we come along with what is called the new leadership approach. And it states that leadership is a process which changes people and organizations. This flows naturally out of the relationship approach, okay? And you'll see it as we look at the two different major aspects of the new leadership approach. There's the transformational leadership approach. That grew out of the new leadership approach. The leader is concerned about the needs of the followers. The leader, he or she, takes note of what the needs of those who are employed by him or employed by his company or those who are in the ministry he's involved in. What are their needs? And although his primary objective is accomplishing the goals, he's still concerned about those people's needs. And the transformational aspect is that he builds them up. He puts them into situations that build them up, give them more skills, if you will, and a greater opportunity to advance. So the transformational leadership is concerned with the needs of the people, not as concerned as the goal of the company or the goal of the ministry, but still concerned with the needs of the people. Whereas the transactional approach, it's similar. However, the leader is really only concerned that the followers get the work done. That's the bottom line, no matter what. Whereas the transformational approach, yes, the bottom line's the most important thing, but the growth of the people is important too. So I'm playing with those two things. Whereas in the transactional approach, as a leader, I may do things to help my people, but I'm only really concerned that we get the work done. Now, the transactional approach, which is a transaction between the leader and the followers, involves different aspects. Well, we'll see that in a minute. It's not here, but we'll see it, because it can create different types of relationships within a company. The transactional leadership approach. It can create different types of relationships within a ministry. It can create different types of relationships within a church. And we'll see that in a moment here. And then finally, to today, from the year 2000 to today, the emerging leadership approach has been, if you will, king. This is what's current, and this is what people are doing. First, authentic leadership. A leader's authenticity is the focus of the emerging leadership approach. His or her authenticity has to be there. We talked about trust. That's part of this. Spiritual leadership, the values and the sense of calling, that has really become a priority within Christian, religious organizations by and large, but especially within Christian and evangelical Christian structures within this culture. Values and a sense of calling. And as I said, Greenleaf, the servant leadership, the emphasis on caring about followers' needs to help them become more of all that they can or need to be. They then become servants, or I misdid that.
So,
After they are servants, then they help other people become servants. Yes, was that you, Dele?
yes, sir. I was saying that they become servant leaders,
Yes, they
like the
become
one that
servant
produced them.
leaders, but they also create new leaders who are
Other
servant
servants.
leaders. Yes, thank you, sir. That's what I typed that wrong. I apologize. I didn't notice that I had done that wrong. But you corrected it very well said. Yes.
And again, please, before we go too far, I had been raising my hand all this while.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask for a clearer distinguishing uh, between the ability approach and the competency approach. I really couldn't make much difference from the two for now.
Yeah. There is not much difference. Well said on your part. The idea of the ability is I have the ability to do it. The idea of the competency is I do it. I'm competent in doing it. Whereas someone may have the ability to do it, but he or she hasn't developed that to the point where he or she is competent. Competency just flows out of that ability idea. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Can I try this idea with you, sir?
Please do.
Can we say then that the difference majorly, as I can see now, is that under the competency approach, the person with the ability has actually owned the skills. He has developed it. He has learned how to not just get results, but get it efficiently. Whereas the other guy is doing it, but this guy with competency is doing it efficiently, maximizing the resources, not just targeting results, but getting results with minimal inputs here and there. That's
Yeah.
the little thing I can see there.
I think that's a good addition there. And I would say the idea of competency versus ability is if I have the ability, 5 times out of 10, I get it accomplished. But if I'm competent, 10 times out of 10, I get it accomplished. You see that? Yeah.
That's efficiency. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the efficiency. That's making sure that it takes place. Yes. I see by my watch that I should give you all just a short 5 to 10 minute break. And I apologize for going, I wasn't watching. Why don't you take a 5 to 10 minute break and we'll come back and we'll continue from here, okay?
All right, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very well.
Welcome.
Very much.
You're welcome, sir.
You're ahead of me, dear. You're way ahead of me. That's remarkable. You were one in the middle. Okay, folks. I see. Yes, Delhi, it did lead to the genocide in Rwanda.
Exactly.
Yes, it was. And it looks like Emmanuel's having trouble hearing me. Is that correct,
Wow.
Emmanuel? I'm trying to turn it up. I'm sorry. I don't know what I need to do to make it better. Although now that I'm thinking, it's a little late today, but I have a headset that's got a speaker, and maybe that would improve it. So next time we're together, I'll use that. Okay. I haven't had that problem too much lately, but sometimes it happens. So please forgive me, but you'll get the recording. I want everybody to receive the recording so you can go over the recording again to make sure you can hear it. But I'll use that headset next time. Okay, let's move forward here. Leadership is an influence process, says Northouse. Leadership is not a trait or an ability that the leader has. I'm sorry. I don't know who that is. Not supposed to happen. Leadership is not a trait or an ability that the leader has, but rather an interactive event that takes place between the leader and the followers. And this gets right back to Ken Blanchard talking about situations, because it's leaders and followers are in this situation. He's not the one that Northouse is talking about here, but it's the same idea. You have this situation where you have an interactive event between the leaders and the followers, okay? And Northouse says it's an influence process. So here is Northouse's definition of leadership. Leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. This is true. And this process has an ethical element. We all know of, let's use the word, no, not the word, let's use the name. We all know about a fellow by the name of Adolf Hitler. And he was a leader. There's no doubt about that. But he influenced a nation to achieve a common goal. The Aryan supremacy, that white Germans are supreme around the world. And those Jewish people, let's get rid of them. They're nothing. Of course, many of the Jews in Germany had African influence in their lives, African culture in their lives. Now, they had been in Germany for 3 or 4 generations, but before that, they were in northeastern Africa, some in Ethiopia, some in Egypt, some in the Arab nations. And so Hitler wanted to get rid of them. This definition we could apply to Hitler. His leadership was a process whereby he influenced individuals, the individuals of the state of Germany, to achieve a common goal, which was to eradicate the Jewish people off the earth. But the ethical element was he was evil. He was evil personified. But he was a leader. He was evil personified. We have leaders like that today. There's no doubt that they're leaders. That's not the question. But what are their goals? And it has an ethical element. They can be evil rather than good. Okay? Now, another aspect of leadership is, or of this whole thing, is leadership versus management. Sometimes we confuse that management and leadership are the same thing. Leadership is a process that is similar to management in many ways. It's similar. Leadership involves influence, as does management. Leadership requires working with people. Management also. Leadership is concerned with effective goal accomplishment. So is management. So they're similar, but they're different. They're similar, but different. And we'll talk about their similarities and differences as we go throughout the rest of the day. And we'll focus on that. We just need to remember that leadership and management, although similar, and you can have a leader-manager, and many managers have leadership abilities, but management and leadership are different, even though they're similar. They're different. And we will develop that thought as we go. Okay? Well, we're going to develop it. I forgot. We're going to develop it a little bit here, but we'll develop it more down the road here. Management. The judicious use of means to accomplish an end. The act or art of management. Controlling, directing. Managers organize. Sometimes leaders organize. So management is the judicious use of means to accomplish an end. Both leadership and management involve influence, but leadership is about seeking constructive change. Management is about establishing order. Now, Bennis and Nannis are going to be quoted here by Northouse. And here's the quote. Managers are people who do things right. Leaders are people who do the right thing. Now, Northouse quotes Bennis and Nannis, who are the two men who came up with this quote. Managers are people who do things right. It's organized. It's step by step. Roles are established. People have delegated responsibilities, etc., etc. That's what a manager does. Whereas leaders are people who have a vision of what would be the right thing for our organization to do, even how to do it. But they still are the ones who are focusing on that vision, making sure that we as an organization are moving toward that goal. Whereas the manager's responsibility is to make sure that we have the steps needed and that we're following through on each individual step and that people have the proper roles and that people are doing their responsibilities. That's the manager's job. Okay? Oops. I see let me see here. Oh, okay. Let me go back.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
This last definition or difference between management and leadership,
Yeah.
it's also similar to effectiveness and efficiency.
Yes, in some ways, and yet
No.
it's a matter of focus. It's a matter of focus. Where is a leader's attention and his abilities and his competencies focused? It's not in efficiency. It's in vision. It's in moving toward the goal as an entire organization. Whereas the manager is, we use this expression, maybe you know it. The manager is more in the trenches. We have that expression, in the trenches. In other words, he's down in the day-to-day working, organizing, and making sure each person's fulfilling his or her responsibility of it. That leads to efficiency. Whereas the manager's, his focus isn't the efficiency. It can become that if management isn't doing it, because he's over the entire situation. If he has a manager who's not fulfilling his management duties, then it's the leader's job to find one who will. And so the leader has to understand management. We'll get into this as we go, but very good point. It's a good question, but I don't think it's just real tight
Yes.
between those two. Delhi.
Yes, sir.
Sure.
I think it's beyond the efficiency and effectiveness because actually at times the manager may even get better results in terms of efficiency. But I think like you said, sir, the difference is more on, okay, what's the focus? As far as the manager is concerned, he's trying to maintain a system. His focus is on the system that will produce the result. The leader is focused on the people and how to even move beyond the present system. That's where envisioning comes in. A leader must, one of his powerful tools is ability to envision. He's able to see beyond what is already set. A manager only uses what is already available. He doesn't need too much of envision. I see the leader as the person who's like a visionary, somebody who envisions. I see him as more of somebody in the realm of strategy than hands-on. And I see manager more as hands-on than strategy. I don't know how you see that, sir.
Well, I think that's very well said and a good distinction. I would just say one more thing. It's not that the manager can't go and focus, not the manager. It's not that the leadership or the leader doesn't at times focus on efficiency,
Yeah.
at times focus upon effectiveness. But the manager is much more focused on efficiency from day one. The leader is much more focused on the vision and accomplishing the overall goal.
Yes.
So there's similar, but not really. The manager, you see, and here's where we have to be careful. Sometimes a manager has leadership abilities and leadership skills, and to motivate people, that's normal to be expected. But that doesn't mean that he or she is the leader in this situation. He's the manager. Whereas many leaders have management skills. And sometimes they don't have managers, so they have to utilize their management skills also beyond leading the entire organization or ministry or whatever. But if there's a manager in the structure, then he or she manages. And the leadership needs to confer with that manager to make sure that all those things are falling into place. But he or she doesn't interfere. They confer to determine that it's going well. They don't interfere by speaking over the manager to the employees in that sense. So there's a delicate balance, is what I'm trying to say. Okay? And I think you'll see this because we ran to the end of this, and with your permission, I will do this. I'll stop sharing this, and what we're going to do is we're going to move to the comparison between leadership. Oh, come on now. It didn't do what it's supposed to do. Oh, I think I know. Excuse me a minute here. Okay. There. Now, can you see that, please?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. Okay, so we have leadership versus oh, now what in the world? I apologize. That wasn't supposed to happen like that. There. Leadership versus management. Okay.
Better.
So we've all been talking around it, and no one has said anything that's really erroneous or in error. It's just different angles. Let's use that word. Different perspectives, because leadership and management are the same, but different. And we go back to what was said by Northhouse. Managers are people who do things right, and leaders are people who do the right thing. They make the determination of what's the right thing. And, as I said, already shared, management is the judicious use of means to accomplish an end. The act or art of managing, that's controlling and directing at the, let's use the word, at the ground level, right where everything's practical. Whereas the leader, once again, is the vision. He has the vision. He sees the overall goal, but he's not controlling right at the practical level. And we'll go through here and you will see it more and more if my, there it is. Okay. Effective management is putting first things first, while leadership decides what first things are. It is management that puts them first, day by day, moment by moment. That's where they're different. That's where they're different. Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Individuals, said this: effective management is the discipline of carrying it out. Olusegun, you have a word, sir.
Yes, sir. I have a contrary view, sir, if you don't mind.
Oh, I can't believe you're contrary. Go ahead.
I believe that leadership and management are completely different, sir. And in your explanations, I I perceive a struggle to merge leadership and management, and I don't think that's correct, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Well, then I have misspoken if you heard me say that you merge leadership and management together. They're similar, is what I said. In other words, they have similar functions from time to time, but they are different, as you said, Olusegun. They are different. And when you're leading, you are not managing. And when you're managing, you shouldn't be trying to lead in the sense of the entire structure. So I misspoke. I'm because I agree with you. They are different, but they are similar in other ways. And so that's where we do like this. It's sort of like, well, it would be like this. I have two brothers and a sister. Okay? Now, my younger brother, Harold, he and I think very much alike. When we encounter a problem, we both seem to come up with the similar solution. And yet, I can tell you, even though we think very much alike on many things, he and I are totally different in other ways and on things that we think about. So, which is it? Are he and I alike? Or are we totally different? Well, we're alike, but we're totally different at the same time. Olusegun, you picked up on that, and I think you're right. But I use that to say, I'm not my brother.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
My brother's not me. But we're similar.
Yeah.
Okay? Thank you. Well said, and a good point. Okay, so let's look.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Leadership has more to do with the dynamic of human relationships. Management relates more closely to the stewardship of material resources. And here's where it's similar. The distinctions don't always hold up because sometimes leadership has to get into some of the material resources and the stewardship of them. It's just a fact of life. My job is X, but sometimes I have to include a little, and not a capital. My job is capital X, but sometimes I have to include a little small y with it. But y is not my job, but there's times that I have to include that to accomplish X, okay? Leadership includes diagnosis, vision,
Yeah.
change, the redefinition of direction and goals, motivation, structural reinvigoration, the enablement and maximization of potential. Managers don't do those things. They're not required to be concerned with those. Now, they probably deal with leaders and talk about those concerns, but it's the leader's job, if I will. It's his or her position, but it's more than position. It's his or her orientation to take care of those things, even though the manager can think about them. The managers plan budgets, they call for decisions, they wisely use material resources, things that aren't always required. Sometimes they are, but aren't always required of leaders. Most good managers, maybe all, have some leadership skills, but, and here's an important point, not all leaders possess managerial competence. And I think we've all witnessed leaders who override the concerns of their management or management team and do what they want, and they bankrupt the organization. They drive it, as we say, they drive it into the ground. It doesn't exist after they're done because they assumed management, not skills. They assumed the prerogative of doing management when they were the leader. They shouldn't have done that. And they didn't pay attention to the things that most managers pay attention to. They overspent. They weren't good with personnel. They had a good product and then they decided, well, it's a good product, but we'll change the way we're developing it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's very interesting. Here's an interesting thing. Last weekend, almost a week ago now, my wife and I were in a place called Sarasota, Florida. It's on the west coast of Florida, so you have the Gulf of Mexico there. And there are two homes within 25 or 30 meters of each other. One of the homes is the retirement home of a man by the name of Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb. Another home, less than 50 meters away, is the retirement home of Ford, the man who created the first truly usable automobile and developed it into a company, some of which we probably drive, some of us who are here in this class. Ford, we used to say the creator of the automobile. He didn't create the automobile, but he was the first one to get it practical so that it could be used by more than a few select people. And those two men retired to within 100 feet of each other. Now, after they retired, they were trying to find a solution to a problem that the automobile industry had called, how do you get rubber for tires and for aspects on the car, other things on the car? Because you see, the United States of America did not have rubber plants. It wasn't grown in the United States. And the supply places around the world where there were plants which grew rubber, those were under distress. Dictators were taking them over. People who were against the United States were controlling the rubber. And so what happened? Somebody's making some noise. Watch yourselves there in terms of your thing. So what happened? Edison and Ford, two leaders, they had a vision for establishing rubber plantations in the United States. And they worked out their vision. They worked out how to approach it. Then, and here's the point, they turned it over to managers who managed it. And they had a successful result. And tires for automobiles made in the United States were being produced out of the rubber plants production in the United States. And so their dependency on rubber, say from Africa or Latin America, which is the two areas where it was, disappeared. But they never managed it. They had the vision and they oversaw the entire organization over time, even though they were both retired. For the first 15 years, they both gave their attention to that as leaders, not as managers. Okay? All right. I just encountered that last week. So, here tends to be the two differences. On the management side, on the left-hand side, produce order and consistency. On the leadership side, produce change and movement. Okay? So, management, involved in planning, budgeting, involved in organizing and staffing, involved in controlling and problem solving. And you note underneath each of those identities that I just called out, you note what that involved, the steps that were taken. They establish agendas under planning. They set timetables. They allocate resources. That's what a manager does. Organizing, he or she provides structure, make job placements, establish rules and procedures for the workers. Controlling, develop incentives for the workers, generate creative solutions, and take corrective action when necessary. Whereas the leader, on the other side, establishes direction, aligns people, and motivates and inspires. Those are two different responsibilities. Two different responsibilities, and yet one is dependent upon the other. And that's where the similarity comes, because they rub shoulders, as we used to say. They're very close to each other. The leader, he establishes direction by creating vision. He clarifies what's the big picture. This, and then he sets the strategy. This is to motivate the people. Communicates the goals, seeks commitment, builds teams and coalitions within the organization to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. And then motivates, inspires, energizes the people, empowers the subordinates, the manager being one of them, and satisfying unmet needs. He or she finds what the manager needs when the manager can't. Okay? So two different responsibilities. Quite different, in fact. Not 100%, they're similar, but they're different. Both leaders and followers are involved together in the leadership process. We're moving to leaders and followers because management takes care of the followers, yet leaders and followers are both involved in the leadership process. Leaders need followers, and followers need leaders. And here's one of the theories that that comes out of what we referred to earlier. We talked about transformational leadership, and we talked about transactional leadership. LMX theory comes out of transactional leadership. And here's what is LMX, leader-member exchange. Value is that the leader sees that the followers are necessary for success of the organization's objectives. So the leader sees his or her workers as necessary. However, and here's a big however, in this approach, it can turn into manipulation. The leader creates insider and outsider groups. Insider and outsider groups. And what the leader, he or she does, is very often he rewards people that he's bringing into the insider group with more pay, rewards them with a higher position, more ability to rise in position, or adopts their ideas, even though they may not be the best ideas. So in the LMX theory, the leader creates that insider group. And these exchanges that I just mentioned, pay, position, ideas, whatever, that insider group, they're able to enjoy and experience all of that. Whereas the outsider group, just the common everyday employee, he or she gets no special privilege, no special attention from the leader, no extra pay for doing his or her job, even when he or she does it as well as the insider group. They're outsiders. That can create, as it says there at the bottom, tension. It doesn't say tension, but competition, which creates tension. And the outsiders are trying to get the rewards that the insiders are getting, and the insiders want to keep the rewards and don't want the outsiders to have them because they know that they can't, if they have to share the rewards, they won't get as many rewards. That's the concept. They have a reduced concept. So LMX theory talks to us plainly about transactional, where I have a transaction with you, the employee, or I, the employee, have a transaction with you, the leader, to accomplish the goals. And that transaction usually involves special privilege. And if it doesn't, then I'm an outsider. Okay? So this is very important, not for leaders and management, but also for leaders and followers. Okay? All right. Okay, any comments, thoughts, questions, observations? Okay, Deli? Please, sir. Go ahead. Comments?
All right. I I think from my what's it called, my reflection on what we've talked so far is that leadership deals more on what's it called, the system, the designing of the system, while a manager deals with the running of the system. The manager ensures to make sure that the systems keeps running, while the leader designs a system in which the what's called the organization can keep running. That's my take on the class so far.
Okay. I've miscommunicated a bit then, because although it's true what you said, that the manager runs the system, often the leader, in cooperation with the manager and other team members, they together develop the system. But the leaders, and what you said is true, and that part I've communicated, the leader's vision is to make sure that the organization is, if I can say it, set up, there's your system, in such a way that they can accomplish their goals. But he or she generally, not always, but sometimes they do exactly what you said. But generally, if they have the ability, they use the manager and other team leaders to develop that system. But the system they're developing fits the leader's goal and the leader's vision and the leader's desire for the product they're going to produce, whatever. So yes, but just a little adaptation. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And so I probably miscommunicated it. I'm not questioning that. You've got it right, very clearly. The manager is going to run it. He's going to run that system, and that's his job, his or her job, to run that system. And yes, the leader develops it, but usually not alone, if I can say it that way. Sometimes they do. And for example, the one I just gave, Henry Ford of Ford and Edison. Well, Henry Ford of Ford Motor Company, he developed the system, and then he got the managers to run it. exactly what you were saying. And he was a leader because after he developed the concept of the system, he stepped back and he let them run it. And yet in his 30 years after that he was still involved, he would watch the system and see if it was working, and would often go to his managers and say, that doesn't seem to be working. What do we need to do to change it? And sometimes he had the ideas. Sometimes he didn't. Okay? At least that's what history says. So, very well said. Any other observations, concepts? Okay, I think we'll continue to move on, if that's okay. And let me see here.
Hello? Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
I want to talk about the LMX theory. The LMX.
Oh, yes.
theory.
Okay, go ahead. Who is this?
Yeah. This is Dele.
Oh, it's Dele again. Okay, go ahead, Dele.
All right. Okay. I'm trying to ask here, what exactly are the benefits of this kind of method for a leader? Because what I'm seeing here is all what I could see that may probably be seen as an advantage, we end up in shambles at the end of the day if this method is wrong clubbed. So I want to actually know what are the kind of advantages that any leader stands to gain on a permanent basis from this kind of system. I don't think this is a good system for a leader.
Well, I agree with you. I do not think it's a good system. But many leaders utilize it and see it this way. With this system where they have insiders, they have totally, how to say it, totally loyal insiders. They will do whatever the leader says. They never question him because they're an insider and he's rewarding them. And it gives the leader, this is why the leaders do it, it gives him or her total control of those people, and in that sense, control of the organization. But I agree with you. And this is where it doesn't seem to work very well. That's why many people aren't using it anymore. Yet, in a human sense, it's used very much. But what happens is the outsiders, they can't contribute, and so they lose interest in contributing. So the leader either loses employees who know their job, they go to another organization, or the leader has employees who are half-hearted in their job and they really don't perform the tasks they've been given. And so it goes exactly where you said, Dele. It just falls apart. Those are the major problems. But the reason that leaders go to it is because maybe it's personality, I don't know, or maybe it's their understanding of leadership. I would imagine they view that if they have these totally loyal people, then they don't ever have to worry about insubordination, about rebellion, because those totally loyal people will secure the entire organization. But it's, let me say it this way, it is not visionary. And we have another expression. My perspective, this is just my perspective, is the leader is in reality cutting his own throat.
Correct.
Over
That's
time.
my opinion too.
Yeah, over time. One of the reasons why it's used, and I do know this, is like that, these loyal insiders become more productive. The organization gains and benefits because the outsiders don't know they're outsiders yet. And so they're still working and the insiders are more loyal. So there's an increase in production or there's an increase in the ability of the organization to fulfill its obligations, whatever they are. I've seen this in ministry. There's an increase in creativity, but then over time, you know, we all know this. People are not dumb. Over time, the outsiders realize I'm not benefiting the way that those guys are. And like I said, they either leave or they just don't do their job very well. Because why should they? It's not going to change anything, becomes their attitude. And that hurts the organization, that hurts the company, that hurts the ministry. I have experienced, maybe some of you have, because some of you are in ministry. I've experienced going into a situation and meeting people from a ministry and helping them because of my responsibilities. This is in the past. Well, this happened in Portugal, for example. And we got to know some people from another ministry. And after a few months knowing them, we begin to have them tell us about their ministry. The overall ministry had 40 people in the country of Portugal. But the leader was using the LMX theory. He had insiders and outsiders. And they were outsiders. And they were tired of being outsiders. They left the mission field within a year because they knew that he didn't appreciate what they were doing. He showed them no appreciation, and they were working hard. They were doing a good job. That wasn't the issue. They were outsiders, and they came to know it. People are not dumb. There it goes. Excellent, excellent question. Does that move in the right direction to help you see the difference there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good. Okay, let's see. Oh, we only have a few minutes. I'll introduce, I think this is it. I'll introduce this, and next time we're together, oops, sorry. Wait just a minute. I always forget to do this. Okay, we want to begin to look at the biblical qualities of leaders. And we, like I said, we'll just do a few minutes here. We won't get very far, but that's okay. We'll pick up our next time together, which will be Thursday morning, or Thursday afternoon for you, I'm sorry. But we're going to look at the biblical qualities of leaders, how the Bible defines Christian leadership or biblical leadership. And as it says there, we want to start with diverse definitions of Christian leadership. Not all Christian leaders or Christian scholars or Christian denominations or Christian ministries agree lockstep on what is Christian leadership. There's a lot of similar agreement, and yet different aspects are represented. So we'll start by looking at some of those different definitions. A man by the name of Oswald Sanders. I was a young Christian at Oklahoma State University and began to read Oswald Sanders. He was a missionary and a great writer. He said, leadership is influence, the ability of one person to influence others. This man was very biblical, and he saw leadership as influence. And it was mentioned earlier by one of you about Abraham's influence. He was very influential, as was David, as was Solomon, as was the Apostle Paul, as we already mentioned. Leadership involves community. Christian leadership involves community. Leading is inspiring people who participate with you in a community of trust to follow you, a leader or a leadership team, and be empowered by you to achieve a compelling vision of faith. Lingenfelter, he and his wife were missionaries many years in Asia and have written some great books on missionary strategy and leadership. So Christian leadership involves community. It's not just about one person. It's about the Christian community around a leader or a leadership team. And it's about trust and a community where people are committed to one another. Now, in my individualistic society, even in Christian circles, this idea about community involved in leadership is less prominent. In fact, some Christian leaders reject that as a part of the definition of Christian leadership. It's more about, in their way of thinking, being the prophet who says the word of God, no matter what happens to the other people. Okay, so we need to be careful to balance these out, okay? All right. Oops, I'm sorry. I moved forward when I wanted to move this down. I'm sorry, this is not moving, and we will work with what we've got. Well, here, I think you can see it. I can't, so it's my fault. I've already shared this with you by Barna, George Barna. A Christian leader is someone who is called by God to lead, leads with and through Christ-like character, and demonstrates the functional competencies that permit effective leadership to take place. That's Barna's definition of Christian leadership, okay? Okay, oh, and I got a new message. Let me look here. Ah, yes. A good definition there, or a good statement, that LMX theory that we were just talking about is more sort of referred to in African circles as divide and rule. And that's a very, very good way to say it. Yes, thank you. Good insight, because that's exactly what's going on. Yes. Okay, James Pluteman, who served with SIM, Sudan Interior Mission. He was there for 25 years, as I remember. Good leaders are fervent disciples of Jesus Christ, gifted by the Holy Spirit with a passion to bring glory to God. They use their gift of leadership by taking initiative to focus, to harmonize, and enhance the gifts of others for the sake of developing people and cultivating the kingdom of God. James Pluteman. He has a book on leadership, which I've read. I had him in a class as I was working on my doctorate. Excellent leader. And he understands the entire aspect of Christian leadership. Fervent disciples of Jesus, gifted by the Holy Spirit, with a passion to bring glory to God. If my leadership as a Christian leader is to bring glory to Steve Posey, there is a major problem. We're in this to bring glory to Jesus Christ, to God. Okay? That's why, for example, Greenleaf, once again, talks about a servant's attitude and servant leadership. It's not about me. It's about God's kingdom, developing other servant leaders who will develop other servant leaders who will develop other servant leaders as it goes. Okay. I see by my watch that we've gone over our time by a minute or two. For me, not a problem. What I'm going to do is say that we will stop here with James Pluterman's statement, and Thursday morning we will pick up here talking about character qualities of leadership. And as you can see, the very next thing talks about Christian leadership qualities. So we're going to talk about that when we come back together on Thursday. Well, my Thursday morning, your Thursday afternoon. 3 o'clock in the afternoon for you and 10 o'clock in the morning for me. You've been an excellent class today. Thank you for the participation of everyone. I want you to feel free, and I encourage you to give your reactions and share your insights as we go. And then that way we will all learn together. I'm a learner just like you're a learner, just like we're all to be learners. So thank you so much. Let's all thank our brother Kalu for putting us together. Thank you, Kalu. We needed your insights and your skills to do that. So thank you so much. Have a good evening. May the Lord Jesus bless you.
Thank you, sir.
Amen.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
And thank you, sir.
Have a good evening.
All right, sir.
Bye, sir.
All right, sir. Bye, sir.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye, sir.